You know, nowadays when you're just chilling, watching TV and you think, oh, what's the time? Most people just check their phones. Fewer and fewer people have clocks in their homes nowadays. But the kind of clocks people generally have in their homes are always battery operated. So this really means the only time you have to do anything with the clock is like a few years down the line when it might need the battery replaced, or I guess twice a year when the clocks go forwards and backwards. Is it all countries that do that, or is it just the UK? So the real focus of today's video is this. This is a 1930s or 40s mantle clock. I don't know the exact age. All I know is it's old, it's beautiful, and it's entirely clockwork. Now this clock is a real beauty. This would have been the absolute heart and soul, the ticking heart of every household historically at one time. This is a very basic clock, but ever since I've started learning about these old clocks and taking an interest, there are a few things you start to notice. For example, my key here for winding it, inside the clock, in here, we have 3 holes, 3 different winders. So the first one is obvious, it's for winding the clock, so the mechanism works and it tells the time. But what about the other 2? Well, let's have a look. So, for the other 2 winders, we're actually going to look into the back of the clock where its secrets will be revealed, because one of the things is the mechanism of the clock is hidden, which in some ways is a shame because it's actually a little marvel of engineering itself. Something that's very famous with old clocks is it will ring a bell to tell you what time it is. So at 1 o'clock it will ring it once, at 12 o'clock it will ring it 12 times, and so on. But this one does something else. It also plays a chime, the Westminster chime. And if you look inside here, we've got these series of hammers and these musical bars, and when you hit them, when a hammer lifts up and drops, you get a nice sound. So Westminster, it goes a little something like this. Like that. We all know that one. Of course, it's the one, the Elizabeth Tower with Big Ben. Big Ben being, of course, the large bell. That's the tune. It's called the Westminster chime. And essentially, this clock will make noise every 15 minutes. This is possibly why people don't really use these nowadays, because maybe it interrupts their Netflix or whatever. I'm going to demonstrate this by turning it to 1/4 and you'll hear that it will just play part of the Westminster chime. So that was just 1/4 of the Westminster chimes, saying it's 1/4 whatever the hour is, and then I'm going to make it go all the way. I'm going to skip the half and quarter, half past 1/4 because you don't need to see that. You get the idea. And then on the hour, I'm going to show you that it will play the entire chime, followed by whatever hour it is, and it will hit the bars signifying the hour, and you just count them. So the idea is you don't actually have to see the clock to know what the time is for the most part. So why would you need a clock that makes noise every 15 minutes instead of just looking at it? Well, it actually dates back hundreds and hundreds of years ago to the middle of the 12th century. Most people at this point in time didn't have watches, and prior to the 18th century, even home clocks were rare. The first clocks did not have faces, but were solely striking clocks, which sounded bells calling the surrounding community to work or prayer. They were therefore placed in towers so the bells could be audible at long distances. Clock towers were placed near the centres of town, where often the tallest structures were there. As clock towers became more common, the designers realised that a dial on the outside of the tower would allow the townspeople to read the time whenever they wanted. However, when people started having clocks inside their homes, this tradition carried on, and everyone wanted their clock to do some kind of tune, most famously the Westminster chime, but not exclusively. Now when you wind up a clock, it won't just immediately start on its own, at least not one with a pendulum mechanism. You have to get it going. So if you were to wind it, let's say you wind it and the clock isn't actually running, otherwise it will just continue. So with the pendulum, all you have to do is nudge it and it will start to swing. There is another way you can start these old clocks. If you just lift it up on its side, it doesn't matter which side, and then carefully drop it down, that will actually cause the pendulum to start going. And quite often, if I'm in antique shops and flea markets, if there's like an old clock like this, I'll just lift it up and drop it down and then just hear to see if the mechanism is actually working. So inside this beautiful little clock you have 3 winding mechanisms, one for the clock itself, the other one is for the Westminster chimes, and then the third one is for the mechanism that will actually ring 3 of the hammers all at once to signify the hour. Now, one of the things is that might put people off nowadays about a clock like this is every 15 minutes it does something, and that's 24 hours a day, but it doesn't have to be. On the side of the clock there's a little switch, and if I switch it, it will basically mean that as the clock goes round, the chimes will not engage. Now, it's very important when you're winding a clock not to overwind it, and it can be difficult to know when enough is enough, but you put the clock in there, and they say when you're turning it, you try not to let the pressure go back, so you kind of support it. This is like tricky to do, but when you feel the resistance is really high, then you've probably gone too far. So while it turns nice and freely, as you feel it start to stiffen up, that's all it needs. Don't try and force it till it gets to the end, and it doesn't require a huge amount. And as I say, that should run for about 24 hours on one of these. Some of the bigger clocks, they're called weak winds, not weak as in not strong, but weak as in 7 days, so you only have to wind those once a week. Well, there we have it, guys. A beautiful little pre-war mantle clock. Now, you can pick these up very cheaply in shops and online, and I think they look fantastic. They're great fun to have in the house, and I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode.